Now we are moving on to the next speaker. This will be again about gray whales, and it will be Tatiana Pridorожная. She is going to speak about site fidelity at the feeding grounds in gray whales in the eastern Chukotka. Thank you very much. Yeah, so you see the title of my presentation. I'm going to speak about gray whales, and this research was conducted in the eastern Chukotka. And as we know, lots of animals, also whales, they migrate in winter and summertime, and they return to the same places. And during the summertime feeding time, so they these baleen kits, these baleen whales, they come here regularly. But as for the gray areas, it is a bit different. Its distribution is more stable and it is quite different. So gray whales are more loyal to specific areas in comparison with other baleen whales. We were studying the areas and we tried to identify that within this region, so whether they were really loyal to some small sites. Okay, first, it is important to see how they choose the feeding areas. The Western population we heard about quite recently. We can say that the gray whales, they have certain like traditions or habits, and they are passed on from females to calves. So next year, these calves, they return here on their own. These studies have been on the way for a long period of time, and we can see how many calves return to the same area. And we heard about it already. Near Chukotka shores, it hasn't been studied so well. But again, we can say that the same animals return to the same feeding areas. The study area, okay, this is a Chukotka, Senyavin Strait. And as for the summer feeding areas for gray whales, this is quite a small area. But we see that there's a permanent population. They are sited there for a number of years. And in addition to gray whales, we know that there's humpback and killer whales and other types of whales. So our field season was subdivided between these species, and not all the time was devoted to gray whales. And the studies here have been conducted since 2017. And for gray whales, okay, in 2019 and 2020, we have accumulated a lot of information. And here I present the results of these 2 seasons. Right, and now we are going to have a look what we have collected. In 2019, the season was in August and half of September, and 10 working days were devoted to observing gray whales. And in 2020, it was 12 work days. During other time, we were studying humpback whales and killer whales. In 2019, we identified 34 animals, and in 2020, 59 whales. We took photographs. Okay, we have a catalog. All sightings were registered. And we see that 5 sightings were repeated. So 5 matches And you can see, yes, photographs in 2019 and 2020. So we see there is a certain loyalty and site fidelity, and probably in future we will see that more whales will be matched. As for the methods of research, there was photo identification and also geographical coordinates were used. Grey whale monitoring is quite easy because you can do it right at sea. Yeah, and and sometimes you don't need to wait for these photographs to be processed. Yeah, so we can recognize the same whales every day. When we were doing this research, we identified 5 sub-areas where there was a large population of whales, and we see that there is a certain trend, and it's quite clear that certain animals, they keep to the same feeding ground. They don't enter other feeding grounds. So here we identified all the sightings, and we tried to identify this distribution map. This is for 2019 season, and this is 2020. And as you see, there are numbers of all the whales, and it's easy to see where each specific animal was spending this feeding period. And we tried to identify whether animals of the same group were staying within the same area. So these are the results. Okay, so average distance between points of the same whale sighting. And in 2019, it was almost 4 meters, and in 2020, it was 2.3 meters. But the average distance between different whales is much higher. Yeah, it was over 900 meters, and in 2020, it was over 1,200 meters. So we see that these samplings are statistically different, and their statistical significance is different. So whales are very big. Okay, so during the day, they can cover the whole, the big distances, and sometimes they were, and all these trends were observed in 2 whales, 017, this is the number of the animal, and these were points, okay, during August and September, and they didn't leave this area. And we see that the distance between points, it was analyzed, and it was varied and reached 1,600 meters. As for 025 animal, it was sighted 5 times during the season. At the end of the season, the distance between sightings was lower, 1,297 meters. So we see that these animals, they are more loyal to certain areas. So they are not chaotically moving from one point to another. So they select these feeding grounds. But yet we don't know how they choose these areas. So we can say that they are preferring to return to certain areas, and we have to learn more about them. It requires additional research. In the future, this might lead to additional monitoring. We know that there are smelly whales observed in this area because there's a specific smell coming of them. And if we suggest that these feeding grounds are localized, maybe the smell appears due to the fact that this whale comes to or stays in the same area. This is just a hypothesis. Probably in the future, we may pay more attention to this. And of course, all this is extremely important for fishing as well. And this has been done for a number of years. And if we imagine that these animals, they come again and again to the same areas and don't leave them, and they stay somewhere around and come here every year, this means that probably they feed on the same type of feeding resources, and maybe it should be considered how these specific species should be conserved. So we have been observing this for 2 years only. We are going to continue, and we hope it will be possible to identify whether these animals are loyal to these sites. There's some time for 1 or 2 questions. Are there any questions? While we are waiting for some questions in the chat, so for in terms of the numbers, yeah, so I've seen, okay, so within 1 or 2 kilometers. Is it during one season? Yes, for these 2 whales, yeah, this is during season of 2020. We also have information for 2019, but we have the average distances. I have a question about in between. Okay, what as for the seasons, yeah, we do see this a difference. So no, I mean the difference between areas. Okay, the same animals. Are you saying that they were returning to the same sites? The same whales, were they returning to the same sites? Right now, it is quite hard to draw any conclusions because this distance was measured on average. Okay, and we were not, drawing any conclusions because the same whales were not sighted very often. Yeah, but it would be very interesting to see how the same animals use the same areas from one year to another. And then, yeah, it would be possible to speak about some specific things like smell or whatever. Thank you. I don't see any questions.